Right. And then, as usual, just forget the cameras there. I know that's hard to do. So I'll probably, whenever there's a loud vehicle, I'll stop. Just
okay,
it should
yeah,
pick up.
Just
Should pick up fine.
Continue conversation.
Yeah,
like we were
yeah.
talking about before. You know, it's.
Well, let's start with just the early days. How did you get into photojournalism?
Well, I myself, I wasn't alone. Sam Allen was another one. I was a Navy photographer, and Sam was Air Force. Dave Porta, who became an engineer at both 7 and 4, was Air Force, taught photography at Lowry. And this was, Vietnam was going on, but this was just a little bit before. And when I, left the Navy, honorable discharge, of course, they give you a certificate. It's called a DD-214. And my DD-214 will list a related civilian occupation. And mine said cameraman, motion picture. And I said, who are they kidding? I said, I was just a still photographer. But okay, it's just, this isn't going to happen, And so I went back to where I grew up, Rockford, Illinois, and my brother happened to know a sportscaster there, a fellow by the name of Jack Wilson, who eventually came to 9. Is another story. And so I had a little bit of an in, so I had an entry-level job at, this station in Rockford, Illinois. And this, so I was, really wanting to be a successful television photojournalist. And we called it news cameraman at the time. Photojournalism came later, which I like, and because we were journalists. And I had a friend that was a cameraman at WGN, in Chicago. And Friday was my day off, and I wanted to learn, and I eventually thought I could, nail the job at WGN in Chicago. So I would get up at dark 30, Rockford, Illinois, drive 80 miles to go to the newsroom at WGN in Chicago to go out with these crews. Figured, hey, they'll like me, the job opening will come up, and and they'll, get the offer. So finally I get a call from Roger DeWert, who was my friend, and he said, well, Wayne Briesman wants to talk to you. He says, we don't have any openings here, but we're buying a station in Denver, Colorado, the old KCTO, Channel 2. Would you like to move to Denver? Well, okay, I'd skied a couple times up in Wisconsin and Michigan. And I says, I didn't even ask them, if they were going to pay me, and they said, well, just watch Broadcast Row when it comes over the AP wire, the and as soon as, the sale is closed, put in your resignation for 2 weeks and drive to Denver. So I drove to Denver, went to work at Channel 2, and Gene Amel was an anchor, Glenn Plumley, rest in peace, Glenn, good friend, was there. And but the station wasn't doing well, so they really didn't let me go, but they says, maybe you should look at some of the other stations, for a position, because, I don't know where this newsroom's going to go from this point on. So I was able, was it Jim Bennett, Channel 7 was the news director, hired me there. And then my old friend from Rockford, Illinois, Jack Wilson, ends up coming out and working for 9. And so they talked me into coming over to 9 as chief photographer. And, I thought, well, okay, but people says, why do you want to go to 9? Because it's like poorly rated, and Channel 7's on top of it. You should stay here. And I said, well, so I went. And this was probably 1968. And local news, I call it the seed days. I think we had just gone to, the network news. It was like, Denver had the 3 network stations in Channel 2, and that was it. But in, Ralda Cronkite, Huntley Brinkley, Peter Jennings with ABC, they had just gone to like a half-an-hour newscast from 15-minute newscast just maybe the year before, and I don't even know if the stations realized at that time they could make money from doing news. So at 68, I go to work at Channel 9, and the experience I had was interesting because we, the B-roll was with a Bell & Howell DR-70, and then we started out with these Oricon conversions, the Yoda conversion, and when I first started, before I came to Denver, we recorded optical soundtracks in the field. We had a little Fairchild mini processor. We would run this DuPont 930 and 931 film through these little Fairchild, processors. It would come out negative. They'd put it on the chain in engineering and reverse the polarity so it would be positive on the air. And you know, you go out with this big, huge amplifier, and they wouldn't work. You'd go to a 7-Eleven to a tube tester, you know, to try. so I mean, this was very rudimentary, you know, and I think we had a lot of fun. I think, you know, going back, gosh, it was Frank Courier, there was Patty O'Donnell, and Roger Ogden was on the radio side, and you know, Roger, I took him out. I think it was his first story, first stand-up. And I think somebody says, you know, we got this, you know, Roger Ogden, you know, is on the radio side. We got this, you know, pretty big story. Why don't you take him out and see if you can teach him the ropes? So it was a hijacking of an airplane by a Marine. It wasn't, you know, so they ended up at the old Stapleton Airport, and there was the plane, you know, drove up. There was a press parking area. And Roger says, no, let's go in and get the people. Let's get the people. I said, no, I want to get a shot of the plane first. No, let's go get the people. So we had like a little mini argument. I shoot the plane. By the time we got in to shoot the people, the plane had left. So I won, you know. So anyway, so Roger and I have had this history, and it was a very interesting time. There wasn't, you know, we had a lot of freedom to do different things, and you know, we were all pretty aggressive, I think, as you know, as cameramen. You know, I think it's much different now. A lot of, you know, the one-man band thing, and a lot of the television photojournalists are also doing a lot of on-the-air work, and you know, they're coming in with master degrees of journalism, places like Columbia and Syracuse and places like that. And we were just kind of blue-collar guys, you know, doing all this stuff. And you know, I think early on, I was able to go to what was called the Television News Film Workshop in Norman, Oklahoma, and I think it's still going on today. It was sponsored at that time by Kodak because it was all film, and I think that was a turning point for storytelling. You know, the way it should be. You know, what we learned at that workshop, and you know, as chief photographer and other photographers or people would come to me, I said, well, I think it was Doug Whitehead for one. He said, geez, he was working in Grand Junction, and he says, how do I break into it? I said, get yourself to the television workshop in Norman, Oklahoma. It'll make all the difference in the world.
In fact, you probably told a lot of photographers that.
Maybe I did. Maybe you, I don't know.
I think you encouraged it. I never made it. But.
Yeah, but anyway, it was, you know, we were at 1089 Bannock. Newsroom was down in the basement, and Carl Akers, you know, had come over from 7 because of his reputation. They thought they could, you know, secure a higher rating with Carl on board, and maybe that worked. But I think Carl and I had some issues that I won't go into with this particular interview that you and I have shared. but it was fun, you know, and we Frank Courier and I did a lot of work together, and we did a series called Assignment Colorado. And Frank went on to work as a CBS correspondent out of Chicago, and you know, for quite some time we've remained close, and we've reestablished our relationship of late. And he told the story of how he left CBS in Chicago to me, and he always wanted to teach broadcast journalism. He thought about CU for a while, but he got a call in the middle of the night from someone on the assignment desk in New York. He said, Frank, we want you to drive to someplace in Indiana and interview the clerk at a 7-Eleven or a convenience gas station store that sold the winning lottery ticket. So pick up a crew. He says, this is it. So then he went on to Syracuse. But of late, you know, during the pandemic, he sent me a little flash drive, little piece of plastic that has a whole degree of my work, you know, on television on this little piece of plastic. And here he took the time to put down all of these Assignment Colorados and a lot of different stories that we did back in the day. And during the pandemic here in Steamboat, we did a little Zoom happy hour with friends. And I would keep pulling these stories out, showing them from time to time. I mean, they're all old. It was done on film. The quality isn't good, but it was fun stuff. I don't know if too many people are doing those kind of stories today. It was sort of of a local Channel 9, Walter, Charles Crawl kind of things, and we did it on the Colorado basis.
As we recall, 76 was the first year that 9 News won the NPPA Station of the Year.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Did you do something consciously to get the photo staff to that point? And if so, what were you working toward to get to that honor that's been repeated many times over now?
I don't know if it was consciously or not, but I will say at that time, I mean, it was a good thing for me to do and not so good thing for me to do. And I became kind of an awards junkie. I don't know if it goes back to, the people say, oh, I had to have, some sort of assurance from my father or something. But all of a sudden, I guess I started having some success for the first time in my life, and it became a little bit addictive. And Roger Ogden always said I espoused some sort of a spiritual leadership. And I thought it's just kind of an example, I says, treat every story you're assigned to as a potential award winner. And I think a lot of us, picked up on that. I think, Bush Montoya, young Hispanic kid that I kind of was his mentor. And I remember a story he did for that particular year was when the gondola crashed up in Vail, and he covered that, and did a pretty good job. Sam Allen had come aboard from Milwaukee, hired Sam. I always said, well, we could hire people that are better than me. And Sam, we had those little amplifiers, and for the magnetic soundtracks, and you would, all of a sudden it wouldn't work, so you just took that little door for the battery and put it up and down, and then it would work. So I think Sam came out for an interview, went out with me, and all of a sudden the amplifier didn't work, and he did that. I said, oh, this guy knows what he's doing. So he came aboard. So we had, I think it was Sam, it was Butch, I think Pat O'Donnell, myself. There wasn't a lot of us. And because I was pretty active in NPPA and got the station active in NPPA, and I knew that the holy grail for a television newsroom was NPPA Station of the Year. And I had won some Channel 9 Station of the Year awards, and so I, put together, this presentation for, an NPPA News Station of the Year. And I did the stand-ups, and I introduced station, all the stories, and I don't know if that entry still exists or not. But, we would always, in the newsroom, and every day we would watch we would watch, 4 and 7. We were all very competitive, every 5 o'clock we wanted to kick their butts. So I think there was a competitiveness in that newsroom, and Roger Ogden, exhibited a whole lot of good leadership. And Al Flanagan, who, he was a former World War II Marine officer, who, boy, straight up, very sharp, but he enjoyed good photography, enjoyed good writing, and that was very important. And we had, at the end of the Vietnam War, we were ABC, and a lot of the Vietnamese that worked for ABC ABC was able to get them out of the country. And I went to New York to interview a lot of these people that worked for ABC and try to place them in different stations. And we, there was a real, real gem out of all these guys, and he was the guy I wanted to go to Channel 9. So I'm all enthused. I, rated everyone. I interviewed him along with a guy that was the general manager of the ABC station that Combined Communications, I think, who owned us then in Oklahoma, and he went with me. So I wrote up everybody, and had where they could place this person and that person. I came back to Denver, and he said, boy, I found a winner. Carl Aker says, well, I've already hired your guy. And I said, really? He said, well, yes, he flew out on his own from LA, and, I hired him. So this fellow that he hired, we put him up in the film processing room, and that was his job. And So Al Flanagan and I got along pretty well, but the only time that he really got after me, you know, he set me down and he got on my case. He says, "You guys are shooting too damn much film." He says, "You know, our station in Louisville, they're doing 4-to-1 or this and that." He says, this is, you know, we can't afford all this film." I was, you know, wait a minute, I thought we were doing a good job. Well, it turns out, you know, little Vietnamese guy that we had up in, you know, that's where we stored the film. Well, he was running the black market. He was selling all our film, you know, so this is film stuff, you know, this was all film, you know, we went from these conversions, we went to the CP16. All of a sudden you didn't have an external battery pack, you had the CP16, you were, boy, it was freedom, you know, it was kind of like having a Nikon in your hands in some ways. So that was a workhorse. But we were still, you know, up to that point, you know, we still use these Yoder conversions and the old 70DR, Bell and Howell, you know, that was our tool, and it was all film. And the Bureau, you know, where you and I spent time, I mean, came about, it was right after, you know, went there in '77, and I think I went there because it was something I wanted to do. I thought it was something we needed, and I also had hit a wall. It was pretty much a burnout situation. I think, well, going back to the Big Thompson flood, I was shooting a Denver Bronco preseason game when that happened. I was on the photo deck at the old Mile High Stadium. I remember some wind and rain blew through. Didn't know quite what had happened. Went back to the newsroom, you know, dropped off that film, turned right around, and drove up and came in from the Estes Park side, and you know, covered that Big Thompson flood on that end. And I think Tim Dietz was, you know, with us at that time as a cameraman. And yeah, I think he went in from the other side, and I think we, you know, hired a helicopter, did some aerials, so it was pretty significant coverage. Ed Sardella, you know, was anchoring, and we a year later they wanted to do a documentary a year later, so Butch worked on that with, oh boy, I'm trying to remember names. This fella ended up working out at Coors.
Oh, Denny,
no, boy.
Several.
He was a member of Mensa. I remember that. You know, he was a sharp guy. He and Butch were covering one end of it, and Frank Currier and I covered the other end of it. And we drove up, I think up, you know, Big Thompson from Loveland, and ran into a guy, and he was at this cabin, and we talked to him because what he experienced on the flood, and we had this on camera, and it was almost, I can tell you this, and you almost want to cry. He said that he put his family in this truck or this car. He knew the flood was coming. He went back to the house to make sure the door was locked, turned around on the porch and watched the flood take his family down the Big Thompson River, and they all died. And so I'm editing this piece, and it was an all-night thing. I mean, I think back in those days, I mean, some of us smoked cigarettes and drank coffee, and you know, you're splicing film, and maybe you're sniffing the glue. I mean, you could go on and on and on. And I finally, you know, got that thing in the can. We went up in control, and you know, we put it on tape. I went home, went to bed totally exhausted, and the phone rang off in the distance. And there was an interim news director because Roger went to Louisville, and Carl Akers sent him there to break up what he called the ski clique. So just a lot of Carl Akers stories. You know, I don't want to, you know, destroy his legacy, but this fella, what was his name? Something Scott, called me up in the middle of the night, and I had just gone through this whole editing session, putting together the Big Thompson a year later story. And he says, there's a shooting in Curtis Park, and I can't get anybody to go. And I says, I can't, I'm exhausted. You're the chief photographer, what are you going to do about it? So, you know, I was a loyal guy. I got in the car and I lost it on the two-way radio. And I said, this is the last fucking story I'll shoot for 9 News. So evidently Cecil Walker knew that I was, you know, worth salvaging. And he says, in the office, he says, what would you like to do? I said, well, a couple things. I says, you know, Barbie Productions. I said, I'd like to do some longer pieces, some more serious filmmaking. But I says, I also like to, you know, start a bureau in Western Colorado. He says, okay. So I did that. So I went there in '77, started the bureau, and it was a fight. And I also wanted a bureau north, you know, in Fort Collins. I thought that would be to our advantage. And I always thought, well, you know, Western Colorado, I says, this is the Colorado mystique. You know, there are people in Denver that never go to the mountains still associate themselves with living here. And I said, I know there's a lot of good stories there. And there were. You know, one of the first ones when I went over to do the bureau was it was a nationwide United Mine Workers of America strike. And I covered that. And I spent a lot of time down in North Fork Valley, you know, several coal mines down there at that time, out of Paonia. And, you know, I got along well with the miners. You know, they were out there. They had a whole big fire and you know, in a barrel, you know, keeping warm, and we're picketing, and I shoot this stuff and I get the interviews. And I kept trying to convince the station that this really is a big story. And so this one, Moose Martinez, he was the head of the UMWA. I don't know if you remember him or not. So I shipped this film back, and at that time, Paonia, if you lived in Paonia, you couldn't get 9 News. You couldn't really get any Denver television at all. Talk News. And one of the miners' wives happened to have been in Delta and Washington. Fantastic story, fantastic story. So Moose Martinez and a bunch of his miner friends, you know, they're slamming a bunch of beers, and they decide to go down to Delta to watch this story. Well, it's on at 10 o'clock. It's cut down to like 30 seconds. He calls me up, you know, reads me the riot act, you know, when I try to explain everything that happened. Well, the strike went on for quite some time, and it was a big national story. And there was one coal mine there. It was called the Baer coal mine, and the fellow that had his name was Bill Baer. Yeah, it's pretty close, just up above Somerset someplace. And he gave me a call because I got to know him through covering these stories. He says, "Come on down." He says, "My miners have ratified the contract." You know, hop in the news car and drive down to the North Fork Valley. And he's, you know, in miners' locker room, and he's handing all his miners $100 bills. It was the first mine in the United States of America during that strike that ratified a contract. Another huge story. Part of the problem was trying to convince the newsroom in Denver that these were really good, viable stories. I mean, this was a fight that you and I both had, you know, when we were doing that. I mean, it's good. There's good journalism over there. There's a lot of good stuff that that everybody's interested in. There was a Ted Bundy story, and I think I was in Glenwood as a one-man band at that time. You know, I gathered information, I shot film. You know, I wasn't much of a writer. I didn't do any on-the-air work, but I, you know, gathered facts and made the pictures. I was skiing at Sunlight, and a friend of mine actually worked for the FBI, you know, was skiing there, and he came down and mentioned to me, he says, "Tom," he says, "there's a note on the board to call your office." He says, "I think Ted Bundy escaped." You know, so I thought he was kidding. And it was New Year's Eve. Sure enough, you know, called the office, and I said, "Ted Bundy escaped from the Garfield County Jail. Can you cover it?" "Oh yeah." So I drove home, you know, down the valley in my ski boots, you know, got in the car, got on my shoes, grabbed the camera, ran down to the jail, you know, at the Garfield County Sheriff's Office. And I, you know, got all the coverage I needed. You know, I got in there where the jailers lived and showed the cell that he climbed up and out of, climbed down into the jailer's apartment, opened the door, and walked out. The jailers, you know, went to church. Jailer and his wife, they went to brunch as they did every Sunday. So Ted Bundy was a pretty sharp guy, had this all figured out. But I had called, you know, I covered him from time to time when he was in Pitkin County Jail. And, you know, the sheriff's officers and the cops up there, they all called him American Ted. And I would get that little bit of coverage as he came down the steps. You know, that's the only thing we could cover. And I know I shot that with a Bell and Howell, and I think I cranked it up to 32 frames a second to make that little perp walk, as they call him now, last a little longer. So anyway, I covered this thing when he escaped. I had all the pictures. I had an interview with the fella that was DA at the time. God, he was a character.
Dick Keenest.
Yeah, no, that wasn't Keenest.
It wasn't Keenest.
Keenest was Pitkin. No, this guy.
Oh, it was in Glenwood.
This was in Glenwood, and he was from Rifle. His family had a funeral home or something, and
Frank.
Yeah, Frank.
Oh.
So Frank. So, yeah. So
I'll think of it.
Yeah. So he was always good for an interview.
Yeah.
I mean, he was kind of a media.
He was colorful. Yeah.
Yeah, he was colorful. So I do the interview with him. When it was all over, he says, "Ted Bundy, I wish you a happy New Year wherever you are." You know, and I thought, oh God. So I had this in the can. I thought, boy, this is another scoop. This is another big exclusive. And so I drive to the Aspen Airport. No microwaves. You know, this is still. You know, was that on video or film? It may have been videotaped.
At that point,
I think at that point it might have been.
Because when I came to the Bureau in '82, you had video at that point.
So I think it was videotape. What year was that?
I want to say 80.
Yeah.
Because I remember in college at CSU, I'd gone to Cheyenne I was shooting for them, but they'd switched to video before, the small stations switched before the big stations did, because they had all the investment in film chains and
that's
film
sure.
equipment.
I mean, because we had the processor and all that stuff. So, our conduit to get material to Denver was Rocky Mountain Airways.
Yeah, or the bus.
Or the bus.
Yeah.
But, I drive to Aspen. I mean, probably Highway 82, breaking every speed limit in the book, and finally getting on this Rocky Mountain Airways plane. Last one leaving that evening to late afternoon to fly to Denver. It was in the evening, last flight. And called the newsroom, flight number, here's the package, blah, 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 hold at airport. And I can't remember who was on the desk, the gal that was on the desk. And I said, this is a pretty important piece. And instead of sending another cameraman who might have been working out to pick it up, say, just call a cab. Cab takes a sweet time, goes to the airport. Last flight of the day, Rocky Mountain Airways office was closed. They're set on the counter, through the door. You could probably see it on the shelf, this major story. So we didn't have the scoop that night. I think they interviewed me on the phone, and it was New Year's Eve, and I think we did a phone interview, and I was obviously pretty upset. So that night, I think we had some family or some friends, and we went to the hot springs. I think we did that about every New Year's Eve. So we're, in the hot end of the hot springs, and there's all this steam, and nobody could see anybody. Finally, somebody way over in the corner says, "Ted Bundy, are you in here?" Some guy says, "I'm over here." Some other guy says, "No, I'm over here." So, little levity about this whole thing. And of course, he was one of the most notorious serial killers that ever lived in this country. But that was.
And then he jumped out of the courthouse window in Aspen later.
That was before.
It was before the Garfield County.
And then he was on the lam in the Hunter Frying Pan Wilderness, and he finally came out because he got cold and mosquito bitten and everything else. And that's why they moved him down
to
Glenwood because they thought it was more secure.
Yeah.
So, and the railroad was right there, so he probably went out and hopped on a train, ends up in Florida where he kills more women.
Right.
And, finally, is executed in Florida. And I think later on there was a whole show about Ted Bundy, the Ted Bundy tapes. And Ward Lucas, covered him up in the Pacific Northwest before he came to 9 and extensively. In fact, I saw Ward not too long ago, and I was, for some reason, I was honored to be a broadcast pioneer. And, I've got a little plaque in there I'll show you. It's out of nowhere. And so I went down, and Rosie went with me, and it was at a little country club out in Lakewood, and it was pretty nice. We sat at a table with Ward Lucas and Jim Milja. He and I are both from Rockford, Illinois. We were both chief photographers at different stations, and always have been very close, very good friends. Tom Green, he was there, and some of the other old-timers. I didn't have, much to show then, but I did show another story that I did, which was the Rocky Mountain Airways. And that was another big scoop. So the Western Bureau did a whole lot of good things. You did, and I think a lot of us, you know, enterprised and covered some really big stories. And that night, that it was early December '78, and there was a big snowstorm. I shot something down in Delta. I can't remember exactly what it was. There was a lot of driving, you know, big, huge territory. I mean, it went from Wyoming to New Mexico, and literally from the Continental Divide.
40,000 square miles.
Yeah, to Utah. But I drove up from Denver back home. I lived outside of Glenwood Springs, and it was a CP16. It was a film camera. We had these little I had 2 little batteries. Put them on charge. They weren't totally charged. I think it was about 8 o'clock at night, and I get a call from Tom Kirby. And he says, there's a Rocky Mountain Airways plane missing from Steamboat to Denver. Can you go? And yeah, you know, so camera, batteries, you know, hopped in what the news car at that time was one of the first little Subarus, you know, little 4-wheel drive Subaru. And so, okay, you know, I'm going to cover this plane crash. So where do I start? I drive, you know, I drive to Eagle. There's a Civil Air Patrol office there at the Eagle Airport. It was closed. Nobody was there. And okay, you know, I'll drive to Steamboat Springs. Drive to Steamboat Springs, you know, up 131, get into Steamboat Springs, go to the sheriff's office. Nope, they're coordinating everything over in Walden. Okay, so I hop in this little Subaru and I go over Rabbit Ears Pass. I go down to Highway 14, you know, from Muddy Pass that goes to Walden. Well, the gate was closed because the storm was so bad. It was blowing snow and they had closed the highway. So I go around the gate. You know, I go to Walden. And, you know, this is pretty late at night by this time, and they're coordinating this search out of a restaurant, kind of a breakfast restaurant, coffee house. So I'm making pictures in there, and all of a sudden somebody says, well, we're moving now to a ranch, you know, back road to Buffalo Pass, out a little town there, little junction, what was it called? Starts with C, Colmont, just above Colmont. Okay, so hop in, you know, I drive to up Colmont and go to this ranch. And, you know, there's state patrol people there, there's authorities, and there's, you know, a lot of the rescue people, and everybody's standing by. And I had, through being the bureau guy in Western Colorado for 9 News, I had made some contacts, and one was a couple state patrol guys that knew who I was, that had some respect for me. And so I was kind of hanging out with them, and they had a radio, and on this radio, I hear, we found the plane. And right about that time, an ambulance pulls up, door opens, state trooper climbs in, I climb in with the state trooper. I got the camera. It's snowing, I mean, it's really a nasty night, and I thought, well, I gotta keep this camera dry. And I asked one of the EMTs in the ambulance if I could just take the plastic bag out of a wastebasket to cover the camera. And I said, sure. So I covered the camera. By doing that, I disguised the camera. And not on purpose, you know. So, you know, I go up in this ambulance, and then I get into a snowcat. And to get into the snowcat, this guy reaches down to grab me to help me in the snowcat. Well, the guy was, I can't remember his last name. There's a construction company here in town with that same name, but there's no relation. But he was the social coordinator at the old Energy Fuels mine, who I had established a relationship with and covering stories there. So I get in the back of the snowcat. Snowcat goes up, and here is this plane on its back. And they're pulling people out of the plane. People are screaming. I was in the back of the snowcat, and somebody nudges me, and it's a still photographer. It's Rod Hanna. Rod Hanna was a PR guy at that time for Steamboat, still lives here. We're still good friends to this day. The snowcat was part of the Steamboat Springs Slope Maintenance Division. They brought them over on trucks to, you know, see what they could do, and Rod traveled over in that snowcat, never got out of the cab because, you know, wanted to make sure we got there. So I'm getting the establishing shot, and all of a sudden the sun starts to come up. It says, man, I've got to, you know, we shot this film, tungsten film, but we filtered it for daylight. And to filter it, you had to have an 85 or an 85B filter. And I reach in my pocket and I pull out the filter because I've got to, starting to get daylight, otherwise this film is going to turn out blue. And the filter's caked with ice. And I thought, oh God. But there was a backup. You had like a little sheet metal filter thing which you could put the little gel in this little thing and you could slide it behind the lens. Open the camera door. God, it's snowing, some snow blows in, I get the filter in there, close the door. I thought, oh shit. So it was a 400-foot roll. You got 10 minutes total. I had already shot some in it, so I had not a lot of time. And I shot what was left on this film. I got the establisher, I got a lot of film, a lot of pictures just out of the back of the snowcat, went down below. And I interviewed, one of the victims. He's coming out, he's on a stretcher. And, I said, well, what was it like? He said, well, we were flying along, all of a sudden, we got down. A lot of good people are taking care of me, it's about all, so I had the soundbite out of it. And that was the only film I could shoot. It probably wasn't more than 7 or 8 minutes of material. Just think what you can shoot now with film.
Endlessly.
So I thought, okay, I've got to, get this film back to the newsroom somehow. But I have to get a ride from the crash site back down to where my car is. Well, there was an old Tucker snowcat there, and they were, they wanted to bring a kind of a stretcher in the back with one of the people that was injured. So I helped get that out there. I got a wrencher, helped get the seats out and stuff like that, and then I was able to ride down in this old Tucker snowcat back to this ranch. Hopped in the car, and at that time there was other media there at this ranch, and we didn't have cell phones at that time either, and they're standing in the line to use a phone at this ranch house to contact their newsrooms. And I said, I'm not going to wait in that line. I drive to Kremlin, which is the first place I could find to call the newsroom, wherever I could find a phone. I called Roger Ogden. Roger said, where the hell you been? Well, I says, I was at the plane crash. You were? And I says, yeah. And then he says something about, why don't you go to the hospital in Kremlin and see if you can interview some of the survivors? I says, no. I says, what I have, I says, I better get it down there as fast as I can. So I'm driving Highway 9, and I'm seeing, maybe it was Tim Dietz or somebody driving the other 9 news car. I pass him, he didn't even think it was me, and I'm flying down 9. I get in the newsroom, I drop off the film, we process it, and they feed it to ABC. And it was, of course, the film wasn't running to speed because it was so cold and my batteries weren't up to snuff. So the sound was a little Mickey Mousey. And so they figured out they could put this thing on a piece of 2-inch or 1-inch tape, speed it up just a little bit, normalize the sound. Transferred it to, there were no microwaves then, no satellites. I think they sent it to New York to ABC on a T1 line or something was that called. And so it was the lead story in ABC News that night as well. And they, I think they interviewed me on the set on the 10 o'clock. I was somewhat comatose by that point. I can't even stand to look at it now. I think at Sardella, they interviewed me for that. So that was another big one. And, I still have a copy of it somewhere on a DVD, and there's a book written about it. And the author of this book, told the whole story called Miracle on Buffalo Pass. I have a copy of it, an extra copy. I should give it to you.
Oh, I'd love to see it.
And so I mentioned in the book, but I was never interviewed for the book. We had this stringer, his name was Harry Blakeman, and he ended up, he was kind of a radio guy. Mm-hmm. And so they interviewed Harry about what my role was, and Harry had it all wrong. He had me living in Steamboat and not living in Glenwood. He had him driving the film to Denver. No, he didn't drive the film to Denver. And I think there was always a little jealousy involved with Harry, who you knew, and he's just kind of a slow guy and lives in Craig now, He weighs about 350 pounds, and I see him from time to time, but I'm still a little pissed because this is a big part of my legacy, and he had it all wrong. So I have so many friends that I saw your name in the book, then I have to tell them the story.
Get it straight.
But then I was very active in NPPA at that time, and NPPA did a story of you know, how I got there and how I covered that story. And so then I, you know, after that I tried to do some business for myself. I wanted to be a filmmaker, and you know, I did a film in the Colorado River Water Use Association, worked on a couple of John Denver projects, a couple of Pope Shoot, you know, and everything was going fine, and then all of a sudden most of this work dried up, and my timing was bad. I was trying to do everything on film, and everything was going, you know, to Betacam, you know, and my timing would have been a little later, probably would have worked out well, but everything was fine. And so I was almost going broke, you know, marital problems, family stuff. So out of the blue, I get a call from Roger Ogden going over to 4, and he thought I could go to 4, duplicate the success I had at 9 when I was chief photographer there. It was a whole different culture. You know, it was union, and, you know, they were just people that had been there the longest who were, you know, if a new camera came in, they thought they were entitled. And I tried to make everything that performance would be rewarded and not longevity. And, you know, half the photographers hated me one day, the other half hated me the other day. And, you know, there was a lot of people, you know, working against me in that newsroom. You know, I won't name them, but this woman has been quite active with a whole lot of different things, like she's into all, but she was a big part of the problems, and but it didn't work. And so Mary Brenneman started this unit. It's called GE Video Productions, and I went up to NBC video production. We did a lot of GE corporate work, a lot of good documentary work, and that was really nice, you know. But let's go back to 9.
Let's see, how much do I have left here?
Drivers Lake is still one of my most favorite places.
Oh, me too. I've gone up there, camped in the summer.
You know, they had a bad fire.
Yeah.
And, you know, fishing's
But I've
kind of
camped
different
since
than
the
what it
fire
used to be.
and stuff, and
And
it's just, you know.
and there's other places there. The South Fork of the White River is a little campground. There's this cave up there. Been up there, hiked up there, fished up there. We like that little campground. But back in 9, and Frank Courier, you know, was a correspondent, and he and I started a series called Assignment Colorado. And, you know, going back on the career, I think maybe for both of us, this was probably some of the most fun, worthwhile, really memorable things that I did, you know, at that time in my career.
It was really like the 60 Minutes feature.
Yes,
for 9 News.
they were all features, and you know, we covered like the last ice harvest out of a lake in Creede, Colorado. We called the Pittsburgh Banjo Company out of Oak Creek. You know, we covered a lot of southern Colorado, and Pagosa Junction store, when the railroad stopped running, they closed the store and everything was still in the store. I mean, these stories went on forever, and I look back on it, you know, and I can't believe we did so many. Because when Frank, you know, went to CBS as a Midwest correspondent, and then he went on to teach broadcast journalism at Syracuse University and still lives there. And when the pandemic hit, you know, we started, you know, having contact with old colleagues and friends. And Frank took the time to take, you know, he still had copies of all these old Assignment Colorados, and he put them, digitized them, and sent me a little piece of plastic, you know, and think, whoa, I mean, here's a big body of my work on this little piece of plastic, you know, so here's all these Assignment Colorados. And it was just amazing to see some of these. Did one with Kenny Heiberger, who just passed away a month or so ago, and you know, Kenny was an amazing person too. He was a Jesuit priest, taught journalism at Regis, you know, was part-time at 9, was a features reporter, went on to be a great engineer. You know, priesthood wasn't for him, fell in love and married Bobby Dodge, who was assignments editor at 4, you know, 2 fine sons, you know, lived down in Rye, and then Frank traveled all over the world doing a lot of, you know, electronic setups and everything for remotes and different things. So Frank and I did a story with these 2 crop dusters, 2 gals, two lesbians that met during they were WASPs during World War II. They, after the war, you know, they, you know, got back together and they started a crop dusting business in Rifle. And boy, they were a hoot. So Frank did this stand-up on this runway, and it came out of the Alfred Hitchcock movie, you know, where the plane comes in behind him. So this gal, you know, God, what's her name? You know, she flew this crop duster behind him. And in the stand-up, he says, and now the ladies are crop dusters. And so Frank's standing there, doesn't flinch, and you can see the wing coming just over his shoulder, and then, and now they're crop dusters. Didn't flinch, one take, absolutely perfect. So, you know, had that, you know, I mentioned that when he passed away, and actually gave his one son that little flash drive with that story on it, and Bobby will get it back to me someday. So I started looking at all these stories, all those many, many years ago, and during the pandemic we had these Zoom happy hours. A lot of people did that, and that was a highlight with a lot of our friends. I would show one of those assignment Colorados. You know, I would pick one every night. One of them was here, Mount Circle Wilderness, with Billy Kidd. Pat Mantle was this old cowboy, and Rod Hanna set this up, and that's maybe we became fast friends. Charlie Myers was a outdoor reporter, ski reporter for the Denver Post at that time. He was on that story. So we went up in the Mount Circle Wilderness on horseback, and right around Labor Day, and there was a snowfield there on the north side of Mount Ethel. And Pat Mantle, the cowboy, was pulled Billy Kidd up on this horse, and he'd make these runs down this snowfield, this glacier on Mount Ethel. And we covered that story, and there was this story. You know, I thought that was lost forever. So, you know, here came all these old memories. But going back, you know, that part of my career at 9 News was really, really fun.
Well, let me ask you this, because even to this day, even though I've been out of daily television news for a decade now, but I still
tell me about it.
Produce stories every day, and I always harken back to, you know, I started stringing for 9 in '76, and joined it full time in '82, and spent another 15 years there. I felt like Channel 9 provided me the professional foundation and the standards of performance that have lasted now for me for 50 years, and you had a 60-plus year career in photojournalism.
Right.
Do you feel that way about 9 News?
Yeah, I do, and probably because it's been affirmed to me by Roger, especially. You know, I guess knock on wood or something. That, you know, Roger credits me for, you know, the success of you know, the standard of excellence to even this day of Denver television photojournalism. But I didn't, you know, I was self-taught, you know, and my experience, you know, my entry was just because I was a photographer in the Armed Forces in the Navy, you know, and but I loved it. I think I did, and I just, you know, an insatiable appetite to learn, and I'm kind of still that way, you know. Right now I'm a big consumer of TV news, and you know, and my wife Rosalie, she'll sit me watching, and I'll say, God, why'd they all that video noise they've got? Here's this, don't they know how to shoot an interview, you know, to soften the background, you know, and you know, everybody's, you know, she sees, you know, something in the background or what somebody's wearing or something like that. I said, yeah, there you go. I said, there's a way to do these things so they communicate, you know, so much better. I don't see much of that anymore. And storytelling.
Thank you. I was going to ask about that.
You know, we're you know, sequencing. You know, I always talked about a film story that a sequence was a paragraph, a sentence was a scene, and you change the focal length, and you know, and there's a way to do that to tell the story. And you don't see it. You see a lot of live shots and not a lot of B-roll. You don't see these little mini documentaries that we used to do back then. You know, there was one on a Basque shepherd that Frank and I did, and it was down by Telluride, outside of Norwood or Placerville, Little Cone Mountain. We went back in there, and my kids went to this grade school in Polton School in Denver, and the principal of that school, his name was Ron McIntyre. He grew up in Olathe. And Frank says, you know, we really want to find a Basque shepherd. So I knew Ron, you know, was from your part of the country, and he said, oh yeah, I said, I know this guy Gene Urity. He's a former Basque. He lives in Grand Junction, you know, bought some land, discovered some oil, made some money, does a Basque festival every year at his house in Grand Junction. They play handball. He's got a handball court. I'll call Gene. Calls Gene. He says, you know, he's a friend of mine, you know, Tom Baer and his partner Frank Courier. want to do a story on a Basque shepherd. Gene says, I know the guy. The guy's name was Francisco Picavera de Navarra. And he was running sheep outside of, I guess, Placerville, up by Lone Cone Mountain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so Gene already knew where he was. And so he takes us there. We go through these gates, and then we come up, and here's the sheep camp. And here he is, the typical Basque. He's got the beret, and he's got this little bandana, and he's got these two dogs, and the dogs' names were La Bria and Sharpa. And I don't know why I have such a memory of this story. So, a film shoot. I put the wireless, on Francisco, and I go out in a handheld CP16 with he and his two dogs and the sheep. And, we cover this thing herding the sheep. And then he's, splitting a little wood, he's singing in Basque. And we didn't shoot a lot of film on this, maybe 2 magazines at the most, and then we got it in the can. And so we're gonna have lunch in the sheep camp. And he goes out, and he's got this side of lamb, hanging on this aspen tree, and he's covered with this muslin, and he goes out and he slices off these chops. Inside this little sheep camp, of course, there's Ron, it's Gene Yurdy, there's Ron McIntyre, there's Frank Courier, and myself, the 4 of us. So he's got this big cast iron frying pan, and he gets the potatoes and the onions and the peppers, and he's frying these potatoes, and he's, cooking these lamb chops. And so we're treated to this lunch in this sheep camp, and you know what they look like, these little Quonset looking things, and so he has this liqueur called Zara, and a half-gallon of Vino Fino, or some kind of cheap wine. I guess Yurdy brought it along or something. So here's the Basque shepherd, myself, the principal of my kids' school, Frank Courier. We all get somewhat inebriated in the sheep camp after covering the story. So I go back, I cut the story, produce the story. We would do the A-B rolls on a projector to do dissolves, back, in the film chain. And got it on tape, and it won a NPPA mini documentary, I guess a 3rd place or something. Well, the BBC picked it up and showed it. The Beeb in England picked up this little story and showed it internationally, the story in this Basque shepherd. Then, you don't see those things anymore. I think I did see a piece at Channel 4. I don't watch a lot of local Denver news that much anymore, but I did see, maybe somebody called it to my attention, that Dave Aguilera, who does weather there, did a story.
Still be going? Well, let me just ask you a couple other things, and I'll probably have to switch batteries. What would you tell young wannabe photojournalists? What are the key things that they need to know to emulate the success that 9 News and quite frankly all the Denver stations and a few other markets around the local markets around the country have enjoyed, like Minneapolis and Seattle, I guess?
I guess it's hard because it's it has changed so much, and at that time, I mean, these were the seed days, and I don't really know if we set a standard or not. But I would like to see more storytelling. The pressures are immense to just get out there to do a live shot, and there's, I could not have functioned in today's environment because of, having to do this stand up myself. You would go, little GoPro, you set it up, and you frame yourself and you do it, and then you open up your little bit, then you do the edit, and it's just I just don't know how to literally, or how to give any kind of instruction in this environment the way it is today. Back then, I mean, when you shot film, the film had to be processed, the script had to be written. There was a lot of thought, a lot of what went through that process, but you still had to get on the 5 o'clock news. I mean, and there was, there's great journalism schools out there. I know Columbia, Missouri is very good, and and Medill, and I just admire really good journalism. And but the storytelling, I don't know how it's taught now. I think the television photojournalism workshop still exists at Norman, Oklahoma, University of Oklahoma. I would really encourage any young aspiring television photojournalists to go there, even on their own, if the station won't send them there. I mean, I would say take a vacation, take vacation days and pay it yourself and go there, and it will, reward you immensely.
But even if you never write a word as a journalist, it really, I'll tell you a quick story to lead into this question. When I was news director in Colorado Springs, we had a bunch of reporters call out sick one day, and I made the comment that, well, that's fine as long as the photographers are here, because we can get a newscast on the air because we have the pictures.
No way to fake that.
No, and I made a reporter who shall remain nameless, who's in the Miami market now, last I knew, really mad. He said, well, you're devaluing reporters. I said, no, I was a reporter, but I also came up through the ranks as a photojournalist and through, Tom Baer and the superstars at KUSA in Denver, and that's how I learned. And it really starts with storytelling, whether it be the written storytelling or the visual storytelling, and matching, trying to match the two together.
Yeah, but now I, as a consumer of news, there are things I watch a lot of PBS. My favorite news anchor in Denver is Kyle Clark. I would someday like the opportunity to meet him. I admire his work so much, and Jim Benneman is I've worked with Jim, and some of the best anchors to me, Jim Benneman was also a good producer of stories. He knew how to tell a story, and Fred Shook, Colorado State University, who I was on the faculty of television news photography workshop in Norman, Oklahoma 1 year when he was on the faculty. And there was Bob Brandon, and there was the other photographer of our generation. Both have passed away. Bob Brandon was a close friend. I wasn't on Facebook, so I didn't know about his memorial service, and I missed it, and I hated to have that happen, because I think it was just about 2 weeks before he passed away. I talked to Bob. I was going to come down to Denver, and we were going to go to lunch or something and spend some time together, but that didn't happen. But he was part of that generation too. He taught, and I think Kevin, chief photographer at Channel 4 now, has part, African American kid who worked for me.
Hartfield.
Yeah, Kevin Hartfield. I think he's been involved with that now, and boy, I'm proud of him.
Yeah.
He's done real well, and I think he's got to be passing on some of the storytelling things. But the pressure's on, the pressure's out there, I mean, we did all this before satellites, before microwave trucks. Now the photographer has to be an engineer, and you have to be all these things. And I was pretty much a pure photographer. I don't know if that exists anymore.
It's rare.
I think it's very rare, unless you're at the high level network level, CBS Sunday Morning.
If you look back on your professional life, and a lot of it's spent in, at KUSA or KCNC, what are the things that come to mind for you? It led to really a rich and varied life of great experiences. It did for me as well. So
it's just unbelievable. I'm 82. I keep kidding. I'm on final approach, not quite final approach, but on the downward leg. If I'm going in for a landing or something like that. And I think it's only of late that I've started to look back on that. And don't ask me why. Maybe reestablishing some contact with Frank Courier, and going, and spending time with Bobby Dodge Heiberger, even though Ken wasn't home at that time, and then going down to his memorial service. Because for most of that professional life during the career, you're spending all your time with other journalists. This is your social life, this is your work life, this is all that. And now, you know, I'm in a place with other retired friends that are lucky enough to live in this wonderful ski town, USA, Steamboat Springs. And retired dentists, retired lawyers, you know, retired doctors, retired Dan that just came over, he had a blue collar guy with CDOT, you know, and they're good neighbors and friends, and nobody really gives a damn what you did. We ride bicycles together, we ski together, we you know, we have happy hours together, and you know, I think that has been a good thing. And I also have to look back and say, you know, my career was a hell of a lot more interesting than that dentist career.
You have stories.
Or that, you know, I have stories. It's just, you know, Rosie gets tired of hearing them probably because all of a sudden, you know, so I have stories, and I've been an outdoor guy. You know, you know, skiing's a big part of my life. I like fly fishing and paddling my kayak and you know, white water, you know, river trips, all these things, cycling, and but there's things I can't do now. I did a lot of backpacking. I've been all over the Zirkles and the flat tops, a lot of solo backpacks, and boy, just to go that quarter mile up a pretty steep, you know, hiking trail now is pretty damn hard, and there's a lot of things I can't do. So I have to say, these are the things I've done. These, you know, my career took me all over the world. I mean, I did, when I was in that NBC production unit, we did a for Intelsat, which is a cooperative of nations that owns satellites. And, you know, Mary Brennan was the producer, Mike Lohr came along as another cameraman, and we traveled, you know, I don't know, gosh, so many countries. We went from Denver to Miami, we flew to Santiago, to Punta Arenas, Chile, back to Santiago, to Paris, to Lomé, Togo in Africa, to Nepal, you know, to China, to Beijing, you know, two assignments I've had in China, two China assignments, you know, and you know, I was there first time in '79. It was still the old China. It was still the Mao influence. And then I went back, I think 11 years later or something, and saw the changes. No desire to go there now. I had the best of a whole lot. Another film, Portraits of Freedom, and I was able to shoot in Riga, Latvia, just as things were loosening up with the fall of the Soviet Union, you know, and you know, all these experiences and all this travel. And I don't know, maybe early on in my career, I think I had an opportunity to work for CBS and go cover the Vietnam War, but I fell in love with Colorado. You know, I had no, you know, desire to, you know, to go to New York or go to you know, go to a network job. You know, if I could have nailed one, you know, the big bucks and all that stuff. But I just love it here. You know, the Rocky Mountains. You know, I do a lot of traveling. We have a little travel trailer. Rosalie and I and our dog. You know, we just came back from a 3-week trip to the Pacific Northwest. You know, had to have a little ocean time. So I think it was this Clint Eastwood quote that I heard not too long ago about he was still, you know, doing work into about 90 or something, and he said, "So how do you do?" He said, "I get up in the morning, I don't let the old man in," you know. So, but I'm slowing down. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I almost got to Hawaii. I would have looked you up a few years ago. We have some friends here in Steamboat who have they lived in Hawaii, and they have a vacation home on the North Shore on your island. And we had plane tickets, everything. We're on our way to go there. We were going to stay with them in their house. Say, yeah, I can look up my old partner, Dan Dennison. He's there. And I don't know, shortly before we were ready to go on that trip, Rosie had a bad ski wreck and cracked just about all her ribs. So that put that to shame. And then the next year, I had a bad ski accident skiing tight trees. And quadricep tendon attaches the quadricep to the kneecap, you know, had to be reattached. That was totally ruptured. And so anyway, we haven't been to Hawaii yet, but you know, years ago I had gotten there, you know, in another life with another friend, and I had kayaked the Nepali coast on, you know, and all the way from Hialeah all the way up to this naval base or something. Or
Well, you probably went from Honolulu. If you went all the way around, you went over to the.
Well, we went up and we came in where there's like a naval installation, and we went all the way past the Nepali coast,
Yeah.
and then came
Yeah,
in.
it's actually the.
It was a brutal paddling
Oh, that's
day.
a long paddle.
Yeah.
It's called the Pacific Missile Firing Range now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I did
That's
that
a long
way back
around.
shortly after I moved here with
Yeah.
a relationship I had at that time.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it's just been a hell of a life, and you know, and like you say, I have stories, you know, and I sometimes forget that I do, you know. I don't know. It's just I've been very lucky. I don't want to use the word blessed because I'm pretty much an agnostic. I will also admit I'm a liberal. I'm a liberal Democrat, and I think there are reasons some of us are. You know, people, conservative friends, you know, they'll say, well, academics, you know, well, there's a reason, because they're well traveled, they're well read, they're well educated. I'm self-educated. I don't have a college degree. I've taken courses. I'm a lifelong learner. You know, I just read news and stuff all the time. A lot of time, I'd rather read it sometimes than watch it. PBS, I just, you know, Friday night, David Brooks, now Jonathan Capehart, you know, and I watch that religiously. I watch Politics Monday. Here in Steamboat, we have a thing called Seminar. You know, there's a lot of intellectual opportunities here. And this is put together by a group of very smart people. It's in the Springs Music Pavilion. And it's a summer series. They call it Seminars. And they bring people in to speak on great topics. And this last year, you know, people spoke on China relations. And we've had, oh gosh, some journalist that was here that we watch in Politics Monday. Oh gosh, anyway, it's just, you know, it's very, very successful, you know, and so we have all these outlets that are there.
So let me ask you one other question. What's the key to successful aging to the level that you've had? What do you think?
Activity.
Yeah.
And being married to Rosalie Summerall. You know, she has this endless energy. Having a dog's important. Believe it or not, having a dog, you know, that dog needs exercise. That dog needs, especially if you got a real dog. We have a Springer Spaniel. They're very sporty, you know, and you gotta have a hiking dog, you know, and yeah, dog's good.
Stay active.
Volunteer work, Friends of Wilderness. I've been very active here in environmental organizations, and FOW, Friends of Wilderness. I was on the board at one time and started volunteering, you know, when I retired in 04. Trail clearing, you know, you put in some time and you're given a Forest Service uniform, which you don't have now. They've changed that, but you're, you know, an ambassador on the trails. You teach people leave no trace and wilderness ethics and answer questions where they can camp, where they can't camp, and you know, I did that for a long time. And then Yampatika, which is Environmental Educational Association here. Spent a lot of time volunteering with that. I drove the van for the adult field trips, worked on projects with 5th graders and school kids, you know, did quite a bit of that. Was a volunteer ambassador at the ski area, and you know, you ski, you do tours, mountain tours, and you know, and all these things. You help the guests. And then I was a ticket checker in the gondola, which was a lot of fun, and you know, did that for about 6 years or so. And now we try to do a lot of camping. You know, backpacking days are pretty much over, but we have a little RPod, travel trailer, and we just came back 3 weeks in the Pacific Northwest with that. You know, we've spent a lot of time in Utah in the Canyon Country. You know, we've done all of Moab for many years, and you know, Bears Ears and all these things before it really got popular. Moab is overrun now. Yeah. Had the best of Moab. You know, I don't feel like I need to go back there again.
No.
Arches, you know, several camping trips at Arches. You know, Kodachrome Basin. Yeah. Oh, geez, all these Utah parks and state parks and Zion.
Are they brookies?
Yeah, little brookies, two little rainbows. I'll just keep fishing, Dan, if you're not here.
Yep.
Anything you want me to do or anything, let me know.
Just keep on fishing.
I'll just keep doing this. Get that sequence.
Yeah.
They can remedy the jump cuts, you know, just by a little,
Put a dissolve in.
yeah, or else just a little, you know, just go to black momentarily.
Yeah.
You know, that works. Of Blue Mesa, that guy that laid his plane on top of a tree.
Yes, and we found him with Jug.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he somehow he just stalled that, you know, little Cessna or whatever it was on top of this tree. Had a rope, got his skis out of, you know, the plane, put his skis on, wrote help in the snow or something, an SOS, and started to walk out. And we had Jug, we had the, you know, the helicopter. We found him, picked him up. He and I flew to Gunnison,
That's
so
right.
I could get the pictures. And then they went back, Jug went back and picked you up.
That's right, they left me up there while they flew him
Yeah,
in.
then there was one other story where Jug, and you know, that helicopter always put me to sleep.
Yeah.
You know, I would get in the back of that thing and it was just the vibration and everything, I would just doze off. All of a sudden he put that thing up on end, you were with us, you were there, and we were flying the Black Canyon of the Gunnison, and he saw the wires.
Actually, I think I saw it and said, "High wire,"
Jesus.
and he went straight up in the air.
Yeah, can you imagine?
Oh,
But, you know, we came so close to death so many times.
I know.
Jesus. Yeah. I remember that. I can. And with a lot more education, formal than I've had, that I've got stories. You know, nobody's had the traveling I've done, but, you know, traveling was all work. To go to Antarctica. And we had a lunch, and we had all this king crab taken out of the shell, just mounds of it. You know?
We're not leaving till you catch one, Tom.
No, it's not gonna
Be here all night, huh?
That's right. There's too much sun on the water right now.
Yeah.
You know, and
They can see what you're doing.
kind of cloudy.
The way you want to do it.
Yeah,
but
they did a good job of mine. We've gone there. This would be a wonderful time of year to do that ride.
out east.
Well, several years ago, I think. Rosie and I were dating, so we went to, one day we did, Snowy Canyon. Okay, I'll shut up. Thing from Carbondale to Woody Creek,
Oh yeah.
had lunch, then we rode back, and then we decided, well, let's put some more miles on it. Then we went off on that same ride.